When my father closed his eyes for the last time, he whispered, "I've taken care of everything for you, my daughter." 2 days after the funeral, my own brother tore up the will in front of me and said, "Now you have nothing. Either serve us or die on the street." For 30 years, I lived as a servant in the mansion that should have been mine. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my dears. How wonderful it is to be here talking with you all. I'm Margaret Olivia Anderson, 78 years young, born in Savannah, Georgia. But today I live here in Monterey, California. This beautiful coastal city that welcomed me after so much hardship in my life. These days I spend my time tending to my small medicinal herb garden that I planted with such care. I started this garden when I arrived here in Monterey about 15 years ago. I needed a place to calm my spirit and keep my restless hands busy. I learned about plants from my Cherokee grandmother back in Georgia, but it was only in my golden years that I could return to cultivating this knowledge. I'm sitting here in my rocking chair on the back porch of my simple but cozy apartment. From here, I can feel the ocean breeze and see the movement of the harbor in the distance. I have my little pots of rosemary, mint, and basil in the window, which I use for making teas and seasoning food. It's a simple life, but full of peace after all the suffering I'll soon tell you about. And you, my dear viewers watching me now, tell me in the comments which little town you're watching from and what time of day you found this video. Is it early morning with your coffee, after lunch, or already evening? I always read all the comments, and it makes me so happy to know where you're from and when you take a moment from your day to listen to this old grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of caring. You know, my dears, today I want to tell you a difficult story that I've kept deep in my heart for many years. It's about how I lost everything after my father passed away, and how my own family turned me into a kind of servant in the house that was once mine. But it's also a story of liberation, and how even at 63 years old, I managed to restart my life and find a new path. I was born in Savannah, Georgia, in the heart of the South, in 1947. Our house was near the river, a simple wooden structure, but full of life and stories. My father, George Anderson, was a lumber merchant, and even during the difficult times after the war, he managed to keep the family in reasonable comfort. He was a tall man, with skin weathered by the Georgia sun, green eyes that I inherited, and a wide smile he saved for special moments. Mama, Eleanor Anderson, was the daughter of a Cherokee woman and an Irish immigrant. She had hair as black as a moonless night and skilled hands that created the most beautiful embroidery I've ever seen. We were 4 siblings, me, the oldest, Victor, 2 years younger with an explosive temperament even as a child, Rosalie, who died of fever at age 7, a pain Mama never overcame, and Jerome, the youngest, who was born frail and needed special care. Papa used to say I was his little warrior, as I helped care for my younger siblings from an early age. Our house was simple, but had its charm. The wooden floor creaked when we walked, and I loved that sound that seemed to tell old stories. The large windows let in the morning sunlight, drawing patterns on the walls. In the kitchen, a wood stove where Mama prepared fried chicken, cornbread, and Brunswick stew that Papa would bring home the ingredients for. The smell of that kitchen, a mixture of burning wood with cornbread and greens, still visits my dreams. My childhood days were divided between helping Mama with household chores and playing by the river. Back then, we woke up with the rooster's crow before the sun even appeared. I'd eat the grits with butter that Mama made and go fetch water from the well with the other girls from the neighborhood. Then I'd help hang clothes on the line while Mama washed everything in the stone tub. In the afternoon, when I finished my chores, I could play with the other children. We made our own cornhusk dolls that my grandmother Willow, Mama's Cherokee mother, taught us to make. We also played tag and cat's cradle with strings we made from cotton thread. My dearest friend was Betty, the daughter of Mr. Raymond the fisherman. Together, we invented stories about the ghosts and river spirits that, according to my grandmother, inhabited the waters. In July, it was the most anticipated time of the year. The 4th of July celebrations began to organize. Even being much simpler than they are today, it was already the joy of the town. The red, white, and blue decorations divided the town in friendly competition. Our family helped make the costumes and decorations for the parade, sewing sequins onto outfits until my fingers hurt. At school, a single room where children of various ages studied together. Teacher Bernice taught us to read, write, and do sums. She was strict, but had a special way of making us understand the lessons. She was the one who taught me to love books, even though so few of them reached our small library. But not everything was rosy in those times. When I was 9, a great flood of the Savannah River invaded our home. We lost almost everything, and Papa had to rebuild our lives from scratch. It was during this time that I noticed the first change in Victor. While I helped rescue what we could and care for Jerome, he would hide, saying it wasn't his obligation. Papa would scold him, but Mama always defended him, saying he was just a boy. I remember once when I was about 11, Papa brought me a new dress, a rare gift. Victor was so jealous that when no one was looking, he threw the dress into the fire. When I told Mama, she didn't believe me. She said I must have been careless. Right then, I understood that for her, Victor's faults were always forgivable, but mine were not. At night, after dinner, we would all sit on the porch to listen to Grandma Willow's stories. She told about the spirits of the forest, about how her Cherokee ancestors lived in harmony with nature, and about the healing properties of plants. It was from her that I learned to recognize medicinal herbs, knowledge that I kept with me throughout my life. The smell of tobacco from her pipe mixed with the scent of evening primrose that grew around the house, creating a memory I carry to this day. At 12, I had to leave school to help more at home. Papa got sick with pneumonia, and I had to take on some of his tasks. That's when I discovered I had a knack for business. I started selling Mama's embroidery to the more affluent families in Savannah. It was the beginning of a skill that years later would be my salvation. It was also at that age that I realized something that would change my life forever. One day, rummaging through the drawers in Papa's office, something I shouldn't have been doing, I confess, I found documents for a property in Atlanta. When I asked about it, Papa took me for a walk by the river and told me that it would be my inheritance one day, along with some savings he was keeping. "It's so you never have to depend on anyone, my daughter," he said. What we didn't imagine was that this conversation was overheard by Victor, hidden behind a tree, planting the seed of a bitterness that would grow for decades. Life changes in the blink of an eye, my dears. By the time I was 37, I was already living in Charleston, South Carolina, where we'd moved when I turned 18. Papa expanded his business there, and that's where I met my husband, Edward Mitchell, whom I married at 20. We had a peaceful life without children. God didn't grant us that blessing, but filled with affection and mutual respect. In 1984, I received the news that would change my life forever. Papa died of a massive heart attack. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was in the kitchen preparing a fish stew when the phone rang. It was Victor, with a strangely controlled voice, telling me that Papa had passed. The world collapsed on my shoulders. Papa was my safe harbor, my advisor, the person who understood me best in this world. Edward and I hurriedly packed our bags and traveled to Atlanta, where the family had settled after we left Savannah. When we arrived, I was surprised to see that the wake had already happened. "We couldn't wait. The body was deteriorating quickly because of the heat," explained Mama, who seemed strangely distant, as if something beyond grief was worrying her. The house in Atlanta was large, in an elegant neighborhood near Piedmont Park. Papa had prospered in business over the years. Victor, who now managed part of the family business, lived there with Mama and Jerome, who never married due to his fragile health. My brother had become an imposing man, always in a well-cut suit with a gold watch on his wrist and an authoritarian way of speaking. After the burial, while we were all still gathered in the living room, the family lawyer, Mr. E. Irving Cardwell, a thin man with small glasses and a severe expression, appeared to talk about the will. I remember sitting next to Edward when Mr. Irving began to read the document. As he read, my heart raced. The house in Atlanta, the lumber business, most of the assets, everything would go to me, with lifetime use for Mama and a monthly pension for Jerome. To Victor, Papa had left an apartment in Charleston and a sum of money. My brother's face contorted into an expression I'll never forget. His eyes narrowed and a muscle pulsed in his jaw. Mama began to cry, not from sadness over the loss of her husband, but from indignation. "This can't be right," she shouted. "Victor has always taken care of the business with his father. Margaret doesn't even live here anymore." Mr. Irving, however, was firm. "These are Mr. George's wishes, registered with the county clerk. The will is legally valid." That night, we decided to stay a few more days in Atlanta to resolve bureaucratic issues. Edward and I slept in the old guest room. I woke up in the middle of the night thirsty and went down to the kitchen. When I was returning to the room, I heard voices coming from Papa's office. I approached silently and saw through the crack in the door Victor and Mama talking with Mr. Irving. "How much?" asked Victor in a low but intense voice. $50,000, replied the lawyer, "and the new will be ready tomorrow." My blood froze. I understood immediately that they were plotting something against me. I went back to the room and told everything to Edward, who suggested we confront the three immediately. I didn't respond. "Let's wait and see what they'll do." The next morning, Mr. Irving appeared again with a grave expression. "There has been an unexpected development," he announced. "We found a more recent will in the bank vault." He removed from his briefcase a document I had never seen before. In this new will, supposedly signed by Papa 3 months before his death, all the inheritance went to Victor, with the condition that he take care of Mama and Jerome. For me, there was only a small monthly pension. "This is fraud," I shouted. "Papa would never do this. He promised me." "Promised you what?" interrupted Victor with a malicious smile. "That you would get everything? Typical of your greed, Margaret. Papa realized in recent years who really cared about the family." I looked at Mr. Irving, pleading with my eyes for him to do something, to recognize the forgery, but he just looked away. He was bought off, obviously. Edward, always sensible, suggested that we hire our own lawyer to contest this new will. That's when Mama delivered the final blow. "If you do that, Margaret, you will never be welcome in this family again. Besides," she made a dramatic pause, "perhaps your husband would like to know about your visits to Dr. Lawrence when we lived in Savannah." My blood ran cold. Dr. Lawrence was the doctor who had treated me when I suffered a miscarriage at 16, before I even met Edward. I had never told anyone except Mama, who had sworn to keep the secret. It was a wound I carried in silence, especially because Edward always wanted children. At that moment, I realized I was cornered. We returned to Charleston devastated, and I tried to continue with my life, receiving the meager pension that barely covered basic necessities. 3 months later, another blow. Edward was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. In a matter of weeks, he was wasting away before my eyes. The treatments were expensive, far beyond what we could afford. Desperate, I called Victor, asking for help. "Of course, my sister," he said with false sweetness. "Come stay with us in Atlanta. I have the best doctors, the best treatments. I'll take care of my brother-in-law as if he were my own brother." Reluctantly, but with no alternatives, we accepted the offer. When we arrived in Atlanta, Victor installed us not in the main house, but in a small, damp, poorly ventilated cottage in the backyard. He promised it was temporary until the guest room was renovated. That renovation never happened. Edward got worse every day. The doctors promised by Victor took weeks to appear, and when they finally came, they only confirmed what we already knew. It was too late. My dear husband died in my arms 6 months after we arrived in Atlanta on a rainy night in March 1985. The day after the burial, still in tears, I was called to Victor's office. He was sitting in Papa's old chair, an expensive cigar between his fingers. "Now, let's make things clear, Margaret," he said, blowing a puff of smoke into the air. "You have nowhere to go. You have no money, no home, no husband. But I'm a generous man. You can stay here with your family." I made a gesture to thank him, albeit with bitterness, when he completed. "In exchange, you'll take over the house services. The cook quit last week, and we need someone to clean, wash, iron, and cook. After all, you've always been good at that, haven't you? And you can continue living in the cottage." I was in shock, my own brother turning me into a servant. I wanted to protest, to scream, but then I looked at my empty hands, at my wedding ring, the only valuable possession I had left, and realized he was right. I had nowhere to go. "And if I refuse?" I asked with a threat of voice. Victor opened the desk drawer and took out a yellowed envelope. "Then I'll have to sell this to the biggest newspaper in Atlanta. I'm sure everyone will be interested to know that the respectable Mrs. Margaret Mitchell tried to get rid of a baby at 16. It was a monstrous lie. I had suffered a natural miscarriage, but who would believe me against my entire family? I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. That day, I began my life of servitude. I woke up at 5 a.m. to prepare breakfast for the family, cleaned the huge house from top to bottom, washed and ironed all the clothes, cooked lunch and dinner, and still took care of the garden. At night, I fell exhausted onto the makeshift bed in the cottage, which in the Georgia summer was an oven and in the rainy season became a damp and moldy place. Jerome, my youngest brother, was the only one who treated me with any kindness, often helping me in secret or saving some better food for me. But his fragile health prevented him from openly defending me against Victor and Mama. And so began the 30 most difficult years of my life, where each day was a struggle for survival and dignity, while I watched my brother and my mother enjoying the wealth that by right should have been mine. The years in Victor's house seemed endless. Each morning, when I woke up still in the dark, my heart would sink remembering that another day of humiliation was coming. The cottage where I lived deteriorated more and more. The roof with leaks that Victor always promised to fix, but never did. On days of heavy rain, typical of Atlanta, I had to spread buckets on the floor to prevent flooding. The mold on the walls worsened my asthma, which I developed in the first years of that captivity disguised as home. My routine was exhausting. At 5 a.m. I was already up, lighting the stove to prepare breakfast for the family. Victor demanded fresh bread every day, which meant I had to get up even earlier to make the dough and bake it. Then I served breakfast to him, Mama, and Jerome, always in silence, like a shadow in the house that once belonged to my father. "This is too cold," complained Mama, pushing the cup back to me. "You never learn, do you, Margaret? You were always the daughter who gave me the most trouble." Her words cut me like knives, but I had already learned not to show it. I just took the cup, heated the coffee again, and returned with a forced smile. "Sorry, Mama. Is this better?" After breakfast, I began cleaning the huge 3-story house. Victor insisted that everything shine, especially when he received his important friends, politicians, businessmen, people he wanted to impress. I scrubbed every corner, polished every piece of furniture, while listening to the laughter coming from the office or the dining room. Sometimes, a guest would ask who the lady was who worked so diligently. "Oh, she's just our trusted housekeeper," Victor would respond, as if I had no name, as if I weren't his sister, as if we didn't have the same blood running in our veins. Lunch had to be ready at noon sharp. Victor would come from the company, which should have been mine, to eat at home. I prepared the dishes he liked: fried chicken, cornbread, collard greens, recipes I learned from Mama, who now only criticized my way of preparing them. The greens are overcooked, the gravy is watery. There was always something wrong. Jerome was the only one who treated me with humanity. When the others weren't looking, he would thank me for the food. Sometimes he would leave a chocolate hidden in my cottage or help me carry something heavy. "You don't deserve this, Margaret. he would whisper. But his health was too fragile to confront Victor, and he also depended financially on our brother. In the afternoon, I washed and ironed the clothes. Victor demanded that his suits be impeccable, and Mama complained if she found the slightest mark on her silk blouses. The heavy iron and the Atlanta heat turned this task into real torture. My hands became calloused with marks from light burns I accumulated over the years. Sundays, which should have been for rest, were the days when Victor received the most visitors. I had to prepare elaborate lunches for 10, 15 people, serve everyone, and then clean everything up, often working until night. I was never invited to sit at the table, of course. I ate in the kitchen alone, the leftovers that remained. The worst of all wasn't the physical work, but the constant humiliation. Victor made a point of reminding me whenever he could that I was there by his charity. "You should thank God every day for having a roof over your head," he would say. "Out there, an old woman with no qualifications like you would be begging on the street." I wasn't old at that time. I was only 38 when it all began, but the hard life aged me prematurely. By 45, I already had completely white hair, and deep wrinkles marked my face. The reflection in the mirror showed a worn-out woman, nothing like the young girl full of dreams I once was. The financial situation was another type of abuse. Victor gave me a miserable allowance, insufficient even to buy basic hygiene products. Many times I had to improvise using leftover soap and making my own creams with the herbs I managed to grow in a corner of the garden, knowledge I inherited from Grandma Willow and which became my small refuge. In 1990, I had a health collapse. Working nonstop, poorly fed, and sleeping little, my body finally protested. I fell in the kitchen while preparing dinner with a very high fever. I vaguely remember Jerome carrying me to the cottage, hurriedly placing cold compresses on my forehead. I was bedridden for weeks with severe pneumonia. Victor refused to call a doctor. "It's just a flu. She's always been weak since childhood," I heard him tell Mama. It was Jerome who secretly brought Dr. Oswald, a retired doctor who lived nearby and agreed to see me as a favor to him. "This lady needs immediate hospitalization," declared the doctor, horrified by my condition. But Victor objected. "We don't have money for the hospital," he lied, the owner of one of the largest companies in the region. Dr. Oswald, indignant, provided what medications he could and instructed Jerome on how to care for me. During this illness, I discovered something that gave me a small hope. Jerome, while arranging my few belongings, found an old memory box where I kept photos of Papa. Among them was a card with the name and telephone number of Mr. Albert Quinn, an old friend of Papa's who worked at the Central County Clerk's office in Atlanta. Perhaps he knew something about the true will. When I improved a bit, I called the number, using the kitchen phone while everyone slept. To my disappointment, Mr. Albert had died years before. Another door closed. The 1990s brought other difficulties. Mama began to develop dementia, becoming even more cruel and unpredictable. One morning, I woke up with her throwing boiling water at my door, screaming that I had stolen her jewelry. Victor, instead of recognizing her health problem, used this as another way to control me. "See what you do to Mama? The presence of an ungrateful person like you disturbs her." I began to care for her too, in addition to all the other tasks, changing her clothes, bathing her, administering medications. The irony was cruel. The woman who allowed them to turn me into a servant now depended completely on my care. Sometimes, in moments of lucidity, I thought I saw regret in her eyes. But perhaps it was just my desperate need to find some humanity in her. In 1997, there was a brief glimmer of hope. I found, hidden in an old accounting book of Papa's, the name of another lawyer who had worked with him, Mr. Arnold Bennett. I managed to locate him, already retired, living in Savannah. "Yes, I remember, Mr. George's will," he confirmed over the phone. "Everything was in your name, Mrs. Margaret. Your father feared exactly what happened. He knew your brother's nature well." My heart raced. Finally, someone who could testify to the truth. "Would you testify to this in court?" I asked, with my voice trembling with emotion. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Margaret, that was so many years ago. I don't have any documentary evidence. It would be my word against that of a powerful businessman. And to be honest, your family has connections that could harm not only me, but my children and grandchildren. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I understood perfectly. Over the years, Victor had built a network of influence in Atlanta. Politicians, judges, businessmen, all frequented the dinners I prepared and served in silence. Who would dare to stand against him for an old housekeeper? In the early 2000s, Jerome's health worsened considerably. His heart, always fragile, began to fail. I divided my time between the household chores, caring for Mama, and the sleepless nights by his bedside. Jerome, sensing that he wouldn't have much time, began to confide in me. "Margaret, I know things about Victor, documents he hides, illegal business, tax evasion. It's all kept in the safe behind the painting in the office." This information lit a small flame inside me. Perhaps there was a way to recover at least part of what was taken from me. But I had to be cautious. Victor wasn't a man who would hesitate to do something drastic if he felt his position threatened. In 2005, the situation reached its most critical point. Jerome died of heart failure. I lost my only ally, the only person who treated me as a human being in that house. At the funeral, Victor made a point of playing the grieving brother, receiving condolences from all the big shots in the city. I stayed at the back of the church, almost hidden, as if I were just another employee of the family. In the same week, Victor called me to the office. Behind the imposing desk that once belonged to my father, he seemed bigger and more threatening than ever. "Jerome left a letter for you," he said, handing me a sealed envelope. "But before you read it, I want to make something very clear. If what's written here gives you any stupid ideas, remember that Mama depends completely on you. Now, are you going to abandon an 85-year-old lady with dementia? What kind of daughter would do that?" I took the envelope with trembling hands and returned to the cottage. Alone, I read the final words of my youngest brother. "Dear Margaret, when you read this, I will have already passed. Forgive me for not being strong enough to defend you as you deserved. You were the only one who really took care of me all my life. I know that Victor and Mama stole everything from you. I know about the false documents and the true will that was destroyed. I don't have much to leave, but the little I have is yours. In an account at SunTrust Bank Central Branch, I left a small savings. It's enough to start over somewhere else. The passbook is hidden under the third loose floorboard near the window in the cottage. Leave here, sister. Find the happiness that was denied to you for so long. With love, Jerome." Tears blurred my vision as I felt around the floor for the mentioned board. I found the passbook with Jerome's name and mine as the beneficiary. The amount wasn't a fortune, but it represented the freedom I hadn't had for so long. That night, I couldn't sleep. Fear and hope fought inside me. Leaving meant leaving Mama, who despite everything was still my mother. It meant abandoning the house that, by right, should have been mine. It meant admitting defeat after so many years. But staying meant accepting that those 20 years of servitude would turn into 30, 40 years until the end of my life. It meant never knowing freedom again. The next day, while serving coffee to Victor, he looked at me with that evil smile I knew so well. "Thinking of running away, little sister? Don't even try. I've already canceled the account Jerome left for you. As his legal guardian, I have that right, you know? The money will be used to pay for Mama's treatment." My world collapsed once more. How did he know? Had he read the letter before, placed some spy to watch me? The feeling of powerlessness was overwhelming. "Accept your place, Margaret," he continued, taking a sip of coffee. "You were born to serve. I've always known that since we were children. Papa may have been foolish enough to want to give you everything, but I corrected that mistake." At that moment, something broke inside me. It wasn't just the hope of freedom, but also the last thread of fear that held me back. I realized I had nothing more to lose, and when a person reaches that point, they become dangerous. "One day," I responded, looking him directly in the eyes for the first time in years, "you will pay for all of this, Victor. I don't know how, I don't know when, but you will pay." He laughed, a cold and cruel laugh. "I'm trembling with fear, little sister. Now go clean the bathrooms. They're filthy." The following years were of silent planning. I continued performing all the tasks, caring for Mama, being the perfect servant. But every free minute was dedicated to finding a way out. I began to save small amounts from the grocery money, hiding it in a hole I made in the wall of the cottage, covered by an old poster. Penny by penny, I built my future. In 2008, Mama died in her sleep. It was a mix of sadness and relief. Sad for losing my mother, for never receiving from her the love I so sought. Relieved because Victor's main argument for keeping me prisoner had disappeared. After the funeral, Victor made it clear that nothing would change. "You continue here working as always. Now you'll take care of the house alone, since you don't have to waste time with Mama anymore." It was the moment I had been waiting for. With Mama deceased, and Jerome too, the ties that bound me to that house were weaker. My plan needed to be accelerated. I knew that Victor's office held secrets that could be my liberation. For years, while cleaning the place, I observed every detail, where he kept important documents, which drawers he kept locked, the combination of the safe that he typed, not realizing I could see through the reflections in the glass bookcase. Fate gave me the perfect opportunity when in 2010, Victor announced he would take a business trip to New York and would be gone for a week. It was the first time in 25 years that I would be completely alone in the house. "The day maid will come 3 times a week to check that you're doing everything right," he warned. "And don't think of doing anything stupid. I have cameras installed in the main areas." He was lying about the cameras, I was sure. It was just another of his psychological games to keep me under control. Even so, I needed to be careful. The day Victor left, I began to put my plan into action. Liberation was near, but the path would be more difficult and dangerous than I imagined. That week when Victor traveled to New York was the most decisive of my life. For the first time in 25 years, I could move around the house without being watched at every step. The day maid, Mrs. Clara, appeared only 3 times a week, as Victor had said, and didn't care much about what I did as long as the house was clean when she arrived. For the first 2 days, I just observed. I wanted to be sure there were no cameras as my brother had threatened. I checked every corner, every gap, looking for any surveillance device. There was nothing. As I suspected, it was just another of his lies to control me. On the 3rd night, when I was sure I was really alone, I went to the office. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it would jump out of my mouth. Jerome's words echoed in my mind. Documents he hides, illegal business, tax evasion, all in the safe behind the painting. The painting in question was of the Georgia landscape, pretentious and expensive, like everything Victor owned. I removed it carefully, and there was the safe embedded in the wall. My hands trembled as I typed the combination I had memorized over the years, discreetly observing Victor when he opened it. 24 to 17 to 36, 09, the same numbers he used for everything, including his computer password. When the safe door opened with a soft click, I felt a mixture of triumph and fear. Inside were organized folders, bank documents, some jewelry I recognized as having belonged to Mama, and a thick brown envelope with the inscription, "Confidential," written in red. I began to examine the documents in the dim light of the lamp. What I found made my blood freeze. There were receipts for deposits in Cayman Islands accounts, falsified invoices, agreements with local politicians to circumvent bids, and worst of all, a contract with Mr. Irving Cardwell, detailing the payment for the falsification of my father's will. There it was, in black and white, proof of the fraud that had destroyed my life. The document clearly specified that Mr. Irving would receive $50,000 for the preparation and legalization of a substitute will in favor of Victor Anderson. There was even a clause about perpetual secrecy. My hand trembled as I held that paper. A mixture of anger and vindication invaded me. Finally, after so many years, I had concrete proof. I continued examining the documents and found something even more shocking. Records of a shell company called Southern Enterprises, used for money laundering. The amounts involved were astronomical, millions of dollars diverted from contracts with the state government. For 3 consecutive nights, I photographed each document with a simple camera I had bought years ago, when I still dreamed of recording happy moments that never came. I made copies of everything that seemed important and hid the films in the cottage inside an empty cookie tin. On the 5th day, I had to make a decision. I could use those documents to blackmail Victor, demanding my share of the inheritance, or I could turn them over to the authorities. The first option would mean more money, but I would have to continue dealing with my brother. The second would mean justice, but with no guarantee of financial compensation for me. While I was considering my options, the house phone rang. It was Victor letting me know he would return the next day, 1 day earlier than planned. "Is everything in order there?" he asked with that controlling voice. "Yes, everything's perfect," I replied, keeping my voice calm despite the panic that was beginning to grow inside me. "The house is clean and organized." "Great, I'll arrive around noon. Prepare that fried chicken I like." After hanging up, I realized I needed to act quickly. There was no more time for careful planning. The next morning, as soon as Mrs. Clara finished her work and left, I put into practice the riskiest part of my plan. I called the office of the regional U.S. attorney, Mr. Everett Madison. I knew his name because Victor always complained about this nosy prosecutor who investigated corruption in the region. If there was someone who would be interested in the documents I found, it would be him. "Office of Mr. Everett Madison," a secretary answered. "Please," I said with my voice almost failing. "I need to speak urgently with Mr. Everett. I have evidence of corruption and money laundering involving Victor Anderson." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Can you identify yourself?" I hesitated. If I identified myself and Victor found out, I would be in danger. "My name is Margaret Olivia Anderson. I am Victor Anderson's sister," I finally responded. "And I am at risk. He returns tomorrow from a trip and cannot know that I contacted you." The urgency in my voice must have convinced the secretary because I was soon transferred to Mr. Everett. "Mrs. Anderson," he said with a grave voice. "I understand your concern. Your brother has been under investigation for some time, but we've always gotten little concrete evidence. If what you say is true, we need to meet immediately." "I can't leave the house now," I explained. "He has people who watch me when he's out, but I have all the evidence photographed. I can deliver the films." We arranged for an assistant of his, disguised as a delivery person, to come to the house to pick up the films. 2 hours later, a young man in a blue uniform rang the doorbell with a box in his hands. "Delivery for Mrs. Margaret," he announced loudly, for any neighbor who might be watching. Inside the box were just old newspapers. While signing a fake receipt, I discreetly passed him the cookie tin with the films. The young man nodded slightly and left. I spent the rest of the day in a state of nerves, preparing the fried chicken Victor had requested, tidying the house, trying to act normally. That night, I couldn't sleep. 1,000 scenarios passed through my head. What if the films didn't turn out well? What if Victor found out? What if Mr. Everett did nothing with the evidence? The next morning, precisely at noon, I heard Victor's car entering through the mansion gates. I took a deep breath and went to receive him with the same submissive countenance I had used for 25 years. "Is the house in order?" was his first question. "No hello, or how are you?" "Yes, everything as you like," I replied, lowering my eyes. "The chicken is ready." Lunch proceeded as always. Him eating at the dining table, me serving in silence, listening to his stories about the trip, about how he impressed the businessmen in New York. I just nodded, as I always did. At 3 p.m. the doorbell rang. I went to answer it and found myself facing Mr. Everett Madison in person, accompanied by 2 federal agents and a court officer. "Good afternoon," said Mr. Everett. "We're looking for Mr. Victor Anderson." My brother appeared in the hall with the napkin still on his collar. "What does this mean?" he asked with the usual arrogance in his voice. "Mr. Victor Anderson, we have a search and seizure warrant for this residence and an arrest warrant against you," announced one of the agents, showing the official documents. "You are being investigated for tax evasion, money laundering, document forgery, and racketeering." Victor's face turned pale. His eyes darted from me to the agents and back to me. At that moment, he understood everything. "It was you," he whispered with such intense hatred that it made the hairs on my arms stand up. "You traitor!" "No, Victor," I replied, looking him in the eyes for the first time in decades without fear. "Not a traitor, a justice seeker for Papa, for Jerome, and for myself." The agents handcuffed him while he shouted threats. Mr. Everett stayed behind when the others left, taking my brother. "Mrs. Anderson," he said, "your evidence was crucial. We found much more than we expected. Your brother won't be getting out of prison anytime soon. And as for the fraudulent will, we'll open a civil process to nullify its effects." Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't of sadness. They were of relief, of a 25-year weight finally being lifted from my shoulders. "What happens now?" I asked, almost unable to believe that all of it was real. Now you are free, ma'am. This house and the legitimate assets will be frozen during the investigation, but there's a good chance that everything will be restored to you as the rightful heir." In the following months, I lived in a kind of limbo. I continued in the house, but no longer in the cottage. I moved to the master bedroom, the one that should have been mine by right. Victor remained in preventive detention while the case proceeded. Mr. Everett introduced me to Ms. Olivia Campbell, a lawyer specializing in inheritance law who took my case pro bono, touched by my story. She was tireless, gathering evidence, witnesses, reconstructing the puzzle of the fraud orchestrated by my brother. "The case is strong," she assured me. "Mr. Irving Cardwell has already confessed to the falsification in exchange for a reduced sentence. He kept copies of everything as insurance in case your brother tried something against him." In 2011, a year after Victor's arrest, the court finally annulled the false will. The judge determined that all assets that had been my father's, the house, the company, the bank accounts, should be transferred to my name with interest and corrections. "It's more money than I'll ever need," I commented to Ms. Olivia when I saw the amounts. "You deserve every penny, Mrs. Margaret," she replied, "and more for the suffering you went through." Victor was sentenced to 18 years in prison for financial crimes and another 5 years for falsifying the will. When I saw him at the trial, he seemed to have aged decades in just 1 year. The arrogant and intimidating man had been transformed into a shadow, avoiding my gaze. Even with the legal victory, I knew I couldn't continue in Atlanta. There were too many painful memories, too many ghosts. Besides, Victor had powerful friends who, even with him in prison, could cause me problems. That's when I met Douglas Peterson, a 70-year-old widower who worked as a financial consultant hired by Ms. Olivia to help me reorganize the recovered assets. Douglas was kind, patient, explaining everything to me calmly, never making me feel ignorant for my lack of knowledge in finances. "You need a fresh start," he told me one day. "Have you thought about where you'd like to go?" I had never considered the possibility of freely choosing where to live. The idea was both frightening and liberating. "I've always liked the sea," I replied, remembering the few books I had read about beaches and oceans in the rare free hours I had. "A quiet place, far from here." "I know a city you might like," said Douglas. "Monterey, on the California coast. I have a nephew who lives there. It's a beautiful city, with good weather, excellent hospitals, and far enough from Atlanta to start over." So, at 63, I made the most courageous decision of my life. I sold the company that had been my father's. I didn't want anything that reminded me of the years of suffering and transferred all the money to banks in California. I donated the house in Atlanta to an institution sheltering women victims of violence. It was a way to transform a place of pain into a refuge of hope. Douglas helped me with all the bureaucracy, found a nice apartment in Monterey with a view of the sea, and even accompanied me on the moving trip. On the plane, looking out the window as Atlanta was left behind, I felt a mix of melancholy and excitement. I was leaving behind not just a city, but an entire life of servitude and humiliation. "Having second thoughts?" asked Douglas, noticing my silence. "No," I replied sincerely. "I'm just saying goodbye and thanking God that I survived." When we landed in San Francisco and drove to Monterey, I was amazed by the blue ocean that stretched to the horizon. I had never seen the sea before, only the Savannah River and its tributaries. The immensity of the salt waters, the sound of the waves, the different smell in the air, everything was new and fascinating. My apartment, located near Cannery Row, was small but cozy, with a balcony from which I could see the sea. On the first day, I spent hours just sitting there, observing the waves, feeling the sea breeze on my face, hardly believing that this was my new reality. Douglas stayed a week in Monterey, helping me to settle in, introducing me to the city, showing me how to use modern appliances that I had never handled before. When he returned to Atlanta, I felt a void. He had become my first true friend in decades. "I'll come back to visit soon," he promised as he left, "and you can always call me if you need anything." Gradually, I adapted to my new life. I learned to use a cell phone, to navigate the internet, to take the bus alone. Each new skill was a small victory against the years of isolation. I began taking courses at the senior center, where I met other women my age with whom I formed new friendships. Douglas fulfilled his promise and visited me regularly. Our friendship transformed into something deeper over time. At 65, to my own surprise, I found myself in love again. Douglas proposed to me during a dinner by the sea, and I accepted with a heart full of gratitude for this second chance in life. We married in a simple ceremony, with only the few friends I had made in Monterey and Douglas's nephew with his family. At 67, Douglas decided to retire permanently and moved permanently to Monterey for us to live together in the apartment that had become our home. They were years of happiness I never imagined I would be entitled to. We traveled, saw new places, enjoyed every moment as if they were our last. And when Douglas passed away peacefully in his sleep 5 years later, at 75, I felt not only sadness, but also a deep gratitude for having shared that precious time. Now, at 78, I live a simple but dignified life. Justice was done. I found love again and, more importantly, I found myself, the strong woman who always existed beneath the fear and submission. The damp cottage in Atlanta and the 25 years of servitude seemed like a distant nightmare, almost as if they had happened to someone else. But I carry the lessons of those years with me, the resilience, the patience, and the certainty that it's never too late to fight for justice and start over. Today, at 78, my life in Monterey is a daily gift that I thank God for every morning. My apartment near Cannery Row continues to be my corner of peace, with the balcony that gives me a view of the sea, that same sea that welcomed me with open arms when I arrived here 15 years ago, ready to start over. My routine is simple, but full of small joys that I value greatly after everything I've been through. I wake up early, with the first ray of sunlight coming through the window. I have my breakfast peacefully, usually an English muffin with cheese and a cup of coffee with milk. Then I take care of my small herb garden on the balcony. I have rosemary, basil, mint, lemongrass, and even a small sage plant that I managed to adapt to the climate here. A little reminder of my Georgia that I didn't want to leave behind. Mornings are usually dedicated to taking care of the house. Even though I could pay someone to do the cleaning, I prefer to do it myself. After so many years being forced to clean an entire mansion, I discovered that caring for my own space, at my own pace, by my own choice, is liberating. Each clean corner is an affirmation. This place is mine, and I take care of it because I want to. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I attend the senior community college. I started with a basic computer course. I barely knew how to turn on a computer when I arrived here, and I fell in love with learning. I've taken courses in American history, English literature, and now I'm in one on herbal medicine that connects with the knowledge I inherited from my grandmother Willow. My friends from the community college are a treasure I cherish. We have our group, the Sea Ladies, ironically, all in our 70s. Zelma, Connie, Doris, and I meet every Wednesday for coffee on the waterfront. We share stories, recipes, and mainly laughter. They know my story and admire me for overcoming it. But to them, I'm just Margaret, the friend who makes the best herbal tea and tells stories about Georgia. On Fridays, I volunteer at the St. Vincent's nursing home. I teach the ladies to do crochet and embroidery, skills I learned from my mother and which, despite everything, are good memories I keep. Some of the elderly there have stories of abandonment that resonate with my experience, and I can offer not just company, but true understanding. On Saturdays, I receive a visit from my godson, Jimmy, Douglas's nephew, with his wife Tanya and their twins, Lucas and Leo, who are 10 years old. They are the family I adopted here in Monterey. When you're deprived of having your own children, as was my case, finding people to love and who love you back is an invaluable blessing. I always prepare a special lunch. My fish stew adapted with Monterey seafood is always a hit, and we spend the afternoon talking, playing cards, and sometimes taking a walk on the beach. My bedroom is still decorated with photos from the brief time I had with Douglas. It was only 5 years of marriage, but they were worth a lifetime. He taught me to trust again, to understand that not all men are like Victor. Sometimes I still talk to his photograph before going to sleep, telling him about my day, as if he could hear me. Perhaps he can. Financially, I live comfortably with the investments that Douglas helped me make. I'm not rich, and I don't need to be. I learned that true wealth is in peace of mind and freedom. I have enough to live well, to help others when I can, and even to take occasional small trips. Last year, I visited Santa Barbara with the Sea Ladies. It was the first time I traveled purely for pleasure, without running away from something. My health, considering everything, is surprisingly good. The asthma I developed in the damp cottage in Atlanta still accompanies me, but it's well controlled. I take my medications regularly and do light walks on the waterfront every morning that the weather allows. The sea air is good for the lungs and the soul. I never return to Atlanta. There's nothing there for me except painful memories. I know from mutual friends that Victor is still in prison, serving his sentence. I don't harbor hatred for him. Hatred would be like continuing to be trapped in that cottage, even being physically free. I prefer to move forward, although I never forget what I went through. Those experiences shaped me, made me the strong woman I am today. Sometimes, when I'm on my balcony observing the sea, I remember the girl I was in Savannah playing by the river, dreaming of a future I could barely imagine. I think of the young woman who discovered her father's will, of the wife who lost her husband too soon, of the woman who was enslaved by her own brother for 25 years. It seems I've lived many lives in one. The most important thing I've learned is that it's never too late to start over. At 63, when many already think life is coming to an end, mine was just truly beginning. Each day here in Monterey is a gift, a blank page where I write my story on my own terms. The nights are the most peaceful time. After a light and productive day, I like to sit on the balcony with a cup of herbal tea from my garden, often the lemongrass that calms, and observe the lights of the ships in the distance in Monterey Bay. I give thanks for the journey that brought me here, for the people who helped me along the way, and for the strength that always existed within me, even when I couldn't see it. When I go to sleep, it's with the certainty that tomorrow will be a new day of freedom. A freedom I conquered with tears, patience, and finally, courage. A freedom I will never again take for granted. My dear ones who have accompanied me this far, I feel that after sharing my story, I need to leave you with some words that might illuminate the path of those going through similar situations. Financial abuse against the elderly is like a silent cancer that erodes not just the assets, but the dignity and soul of the person. If you are a victim of financial abuse, know that you are not alone. Often, as happened to me, it's family members themselves who commit this type of violence. Children, grandchildren, nephews who control retirement money, who appropriate the house or assets, who take out loans using the elderly person's name, who threaten or emotionally manipulate to gain access to the patrimony. The first step to freeing yourself is recognizing that this is wrong and that you don't deserve this treatment. It took me decades to understand that I didn't owe gratitude to my brother for sheltering me. That house was mine by right, and I was being exploited. Many elderly people stay silent out of shame, out of fear of being alone, or out of not wanting to harm the abusive family member. I understand these feelings, but believe me, silence only prolongs the suffering. Seek help. Today, there are resources that weren't available in my time. The Elder Abuse Hotline at 1-800-677-1116 is a free and anonymous channel to report any type of violence against the elderly. In large cities, there are specialized services for elder care. Adult Protective Services also offers shelter and guidance. If you can't leave the house or fear reprisals, ask for help from someone you trust, a neighbor, a friend from church, an old colleague. That's how I managed to contact the prosecutor who changed my life. A single person willing to extend a hand can make all the difference. Documents are important. If you can, keep copies of deeds, wills, bank statements, any paper that proves your right to property or income. In my case, the photographs of my brother's documents were decisive in proving the fraud. Today, with cell phones, it's much easier to record these proofs. For those around an elderly person, be alert to the signs. Sudden changes in the financial situation, unexpected transfer of assets, social isolation imposed by family members, impediment of access to bank accounts or personal documents. Often, the elderly person doesn't ask for help out of fear or shame. An attentive eye can save a life. To professionals, bankers, doctors, social workers who deal with the elderly daily, you are a very important front line. A simple question about how the elderly person's resources are being managed can reveal situations of abuse. Don't be silent in the face of suspicions. What I most want to convey is that it's never too late to start over. At 63, when many think that life is at its end, mine was only truly beginning. I lost a lot of time, it's true, but I gained wisdom, strength, and mainly, freedom. Each day I live now has a special flavor because I know the value of being able to make my own choices. There is no age to be happy. There is no age to be free. There is no age to fight for your rights. As long as there is life, there is the possibility of change. I am living proof of that. If you know someone who is suffering financial abuse or any other type of violence, don't wait to act. A word of support, guidance on where to seek help, or even an anonymous report can save this person from years of suffering. If I had found someone like that on my path earlier, perhaps I wouldn't have lost 25 years of my life. I thank you from the bottom of my heart, all who have accompanied me on this journey of memories. It wasn't easy to relive certain moments, but if my story can help at least one person find the courage to change their situation, all this effort will have been worth it. My dear ones, please, if you know an elderly person who is being financially abused by children or relatives who steal their retirement, their assets, or control their money, leaving them in misery, share this video immediately with them. Every minute that passes, another elderly person is losing not just their livelihood, but their dignity. Subscribe to the channel right now and hit the bell because sharing these stories can literally save lives. Perhaps your neighbor, your aunt, or even your own mother is suffering in silence, afraid to ask for help. Comment below if you know of any case like this or if you've already helped someone get out of this terrible situation. Your experience can guide another person to freedom. Do this now. Don't wait even one more minute. Because, my dear ones, what I never told anyone until today is that when I finally reported my brother, I discovered he had a plan to get rid of me permanently. Among the documents found by the police, there was the purchase of rat poison in large quantities and notes on how to administer it in small daily doses in my tea to simulate a natural death. If I had waited a few more months to act, I wouldn't be here today telling my story.